All right, in this video, we're going to model the typical inflationary pressure. Okay, so we're going to keep the same assumption we had last time, the assumption that we start in a long-run equilibrium. Again, you don't have to exactly start in the long-run equilibrium, but if we started well below it, the situation would be a little bit different. Okay, so we can go ahead and draw this long-run equilibrium. And then the second thing, which I failed to mention last time, but I probably should have, is we're also going to assume that we don't have long-run growth taking place. Okay, so the reason for assuming that is just to kind of be able to focus on one thing instead of two things at the same time, which can get kind of confusing. So we're not going to let our potential GDP to shift is the idea. Okay, so typically then this would start as we get an increase in aggregate demand for some reason. So we're already at our potential GDP, and now aggregate demand is increasing. You can think of it, well, it's increasing fast. The demand for goods and services is increasing faster than the production. So what would cause this? Well, it would be a lot of things. For example, we could have a housing boom. So housing boom, not only will there be lots of building going on of new houses, but people feel wealthier and they might they feel wealthier and then they'll spend more money. We could also see the economy is already at potential GDP, and then we do big tax cuts. Okay, this could potentially increase aggregate demand, especially if those tax cuts are for middle and lower income households. If they're for upper income households or for firms, then it may or may not. It sort of depends on what effect it has on investment. Okay, and we could also see something called the increase in the money supply. We'll talk about this later. Okay, so let's come back to this later. So let's say this happens, and so we got an increase in our aggregate demand, and I should have labeled these things. I didn't label them well. Let's put a 1 on all the original ones. So we got an increase in aggregate demand, and so we're going to go from point A, and we're going to go up this short-run aggregate supply curve, going up the curve, and we end up at something like point B. Okay, so we end up above our potential GDP for a while. So in the short run, the firms raise output, and they also raise prices, but they raise output as well. And the reason they do is, well, remember, wages and costs, like wages and rent especially, are sticky. Okay, so they got an increase in profit in the short run. In the short run, they get more profit, so they produce more. So we get increase in real GDP production, right? And we also see, so we end up at B. We end up at this point B. So we'll go to point B. And we also see an increase in the price level. So both of these things are happening, right? So that's where we're at. So in the short run, this boost in aggregate demand actually has a real effect. It causes output to go up. It has a real effect. It does cause prices to go up a little bit, but it also causes output to go up. Okay, so now the next question is, well, what's going to happen next? So again, we know that B is a short-run equilibrium, but it can't be a long-run equilibrium because we can't stay above, by definition, we can't stay above our potential GDP in the long run. If we could, then it's not the potential GDP. So there's two things going on at B. So we're actually above our potential GDP. So we have a super low unemployment rate. And we also probably have a super low vacancy rate for renting space, commercial space. So there's going to be pressure on these things. There's going to be pressure on wages and rent and other costs. So along the curve, they didn't change, but now there's pressure on them to change. And so they're going to start changing. Now, as they start changing, then that's going to cause a shift. So the rising costs shift the short-run aggregate supply curve to the left. Okay, so let me go ahead and do this one. So our short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the left as we get rising costs, and they keep rising and they keep rising, assuming this demand doesn't change, assuming this demand curve does not. So get the idea. So our short-run aggregate supply curve falls, and so these costs go up, and so as the costs go up, the businesses start cutting back on their production, and they keep rising until we get to this point C here. Okay, and at C we're back into, this is back to long run equilibrium. And notice something about this. At the long run equilibrium here, we have an increase in the price level, but y is back to the potential. Okay, so we get an increase in the price level, but y is back to the potential. And so we reach a final conclusion that's kind of important, that just increasing aggregate demand, so just boosting demand, cannot give us long run growth. Okay, it can push us forward in the short run, but it can't give us long run growth. If it could, then things would be very simple. If it could give us long run economic growth, then countries could just use the monetary and fiscal policy to boost their aggregate demand and boost and boost and boost and boost, and then they would just grow at a rapid rate, right? But this can only work for so long. In the long run, we need to focus on our labor capital, human capital, natural resources, and technology. Okay, so let me just kind of summarize what I just said there. So, long run, there's no economic growth without an increase in productive ability. So we should focus on, for long run growth, we got to focus on capital, human capital, natural resources, and tech. Right, and so this is, you can kind of consider this to be the classical or neoclassical viewpoint. Okay, so neoclassical viewpoint tends to point us towards these kind of long run factors, pointing out that yes, aggregate demand can boost the output in the short run, but then at the end we end up just with the same output but with a higher price level than before. So this viewpoint has a lot of truth when we're operating in this neoclassical zone. So just to remind you where we're at, I'm not going to label everything. So if we're talking about over here, then this definitely seems to have a lot of truth to it, that further trying to increase aggregate demand, I'm trying to increase the output by increasing aggregate demand. Once we reach this kind of zone over here, it's definitely, in the short run, it's going to lead to some inflation. In the long run, it seems that it's going to lead to even more inflation, yes. Now, if we're way over here, say like this other side, so we're way over here, in a deep recession, this so-called Keynesian zone. Now, over here, it seems like there still is some space for aggregate demand to boost increases in aggregate demand to boost the economy. It's not causing long-run economic growth, but it is pushing us back closer to this kind of equilibrium where we get back to our natural rate of unemployment. We'll discuss these a little further when in a future chapter when we come and start talking about the specific policies to deal with this kind of two problems.